Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for joining this meeting of the West County Water Quality and Recycled Water Supply Feasibility Study. My name is Sam McGill. I'm a facilitator with Sacramento State University, assisting Sonoma Water and the Russian River County Sanitation District with these meetings. As a few more folks are filtering in, I want to just run through a couple of very quick protocols for our meeting today. You'll notice if you're joining as a member of the public or as a member of the committee, you're muted right now. We would ask that you keep yourself on mute throughout the discussion just to cut down on any background noise. I think folks are generally pretty familiar with Zoom at this point, but just in case, if you open the participants list, hover over your name and just hit mute. More out of curiosity than anything else, I also welcome people to rename themselves in that participants list by hovering your cursor over your name, clicking on those three little dots, and telling us what organization you're from as well. So for instance, if you take a look at mine, it says Sam McGill, Sacramento State University. That'll help us just have a better understanding of where you're all coming from, since we're expecting a little bit bigger crowd than we had at previous meetings. As we're getting started here, I know folks are still filtering in, but I wanted to introduce Kent Gilfie. Kent is the Director of Engineering for Sonoma Water, and see if you have any opening remarks you'd like to provide. Kent?
Great. Thank you, Sam. Yeah, I'll just make some brief welcoming remarks. I just do want to welcome everybody to this, our fourth stakeholder committee meeting, as well as any members of the public that are joining us as well. I do want to reiterate our appreciation to committee members and participants who have been with us through this journey that started last fall. Again, this is our fourth meeting, and the effort will continue into next summer. I also want to just thank our team that's helping to facilitate our meetings and will be presenting today. I trust that you'll find today's discussion interesting, as we will begin venturing beyond just the conceptual alternatives that have been thus far identified, and we start digging into looking at how unsewered communities may fit into a possible regionalization of sanitation facility into that picture. So definitely looking forward to today's discussion. Again, your input, your questions are valuable to the process for us. I don't know if Brenda's joined us today, but I want to thank her on behalf of the Watershed Protection Committee. She provided written comments for our team to consider as we move forward. That's really helpful and appreciate that. We expect some of those questions and topics may get covered today in today's topic. And lastly, I'll just remind us that it's a high-level feasibility study. We're looking kind of broad concept level. If these existing facilities could be interconnected in some fashion, how might those meet some of these wastewater, recycled water, and unsewered community needs moving forward? But more refined aspects of feasibility, some aspects of more refined aspects of it are beyond the scope of this high-level study and would need to be evaluated further in the future. But we are expecting that we're going to be able to come up with something that looks hopefully promising at the end of this. And again, so your input on this process is welcome, appreciated, and very valuable. So I'll leave the opening remarks at that, Sam, and thank you very much, everyone.
All right. Thanks so much for those remarks, Kent. So just another quick reminder, all of your lines are on mute right now. We're expecting, I imagine, a few more folks will filter in because we have a larger group today than we have at previous meetings. If you wish to comment or at any of the question breaks that we'll have throughout the meeting, just use the little hand raise feature and I can unmute you from my end. You can find that button on your Zoom controls at the bottom of your screen by clicking on the React or Reactions button and then select Hand Raise, and we'll get you into the queue. With that, I'd like to go ahead and take a quick look at our agenda for the day. In just a moment, I'd love for staff to introduce themselves and members of the stakeholder committee. That's those individuals who have been with us since the beginning. We'd love to hear how you're doing and welcome you to provide a quick introduction. We're really, as Kent mentioned, there's a few things we want to focus on. Peristu Hushiel Sadat is going to give you a quick recap and review of the study, scope of work, and timeline. This has been kind of a running theme throughout all the meetings. We just want to cue you into where we are in the process right now and what you can expect in the near future. So many thanks to Peristu for providing that information. After that, we'll turn it over to Catherine Geese from West Yoast. Catherine is one of the principal engineers working on the project, the consulting team, and it's going to give you an overview of the refined evaluation of regionalization alternatives. So the material that you'll see today is really building on your last meeting in May and also incorporates really important information about analysis done for capital and operating costs for each one of the alternatives. And then we're going to shift gears a little bit and take a look at unsewered communities. This has been an ongoing topic of interest, I know, for many, if not most of you. And today's really the first time that you're going to see the unsewered community cluster evaluation that the engineering team has been working hard on over the last couple of months. So I know folks are excited to see that. After that, we're going to open it up for discussion. In particular, we want to hear about opportunities and challenges for applying those unsewered community clusters to the refined alternatives. But we also want to make sure that we're getting any input that you might have on the alternatives themselves, especially now that we have that new cost information. We'll close out with a quick recap of any assignments and next steps, and it's our goal to get you out of here at 6 p.m. But with that, why don't we do a quick run through of staff introductions. I'll just call out your name, and if you could introduce yourself, that'd be great. We'll start at the top of my list with Andrea Rodriguez.
Hi, Andrea Rodriguez, Communications Manager with Sonoma Water.
Thanks so much. Ann Dubé.
Hey, Ann Dubé, consultant helping Sonoma Water on communications and outreach on this project.
Great. Catherine Geese.
Sorry, wasn't prepared. Okay, there we go. Catherine Geese with West Yoast Associates, and I'm the project manager for the technical team on doing these evaluations.
Thanks, Catherine. And Peristu Hushiel Sadat.
Hi, Parastu Hushiel Sadat. I am the project manager for the feasibility study on in Sonoma Water.
All right. And I made a quick note of all of the individuals that I have on my list from the actual stakeholder committee itself. I know a number of you are joining as members of the public, but it'd be great to hear from our committee members as well. So I'll start at the top of my list. I have Chad Davison. Chad, can you introduce yourself? Oh, I need to unmute you. Go.
Yes, thank you for that. Yeah, I'm Chad Davison. I'm a management consultant with both Forestville Water District and Grayton Community Services District.
Thanks, Chad. About Kyla Brook.
Hi, I'm Kyla Brook. I've been on the CAG since its inception. I'm a realtor and I've been involved in looking at wastewater issues since 2002.
Okay. Thanks, Kyla. Matt McDermott.
I'm Matt McDermott. I'm the current chairman of the board for the Forestville Water District.
Thanks, Matt. Rich Holmer.
Okay, here I am. Rich Holmer, I'm on the CAG for Monterey Villa Ground and also on the board of directors for Sweetwater Springs Water District and commissioner on Sonoma LAFCO.
Wonderful. Thanks, Rich. Tina Lowe.
Excuse me. Hello, everyone. I'm Tina Lowe. I'm the recycled water engineer at the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board.
Thanks, Tina. And also from the regional board, we have Matt Herman.
Yeah, I'm Matt Herman. I am the permit writer that oversees Russian River CSD, as well as some other facilities that Sonoma Water operates.
Okay, thank you. Todd Hunsdorfer.
Hi, everybody. I'm Todd. I'm with Sonoma County's Administrator's Office as a clean water analyst and ombudsperson.
Thanks, Todd. Steve Trippy. Steve, can you hear us? Probably have to click unmute.
Oh, hi, I'm Steve Trippy. I'm with the Lower Russian River Wastewater Citizens Advisory Group, referred to already in this call as the CAG. I'm co-chair along with Dan Fine. We've been at this for 7 years on this particular iteration of dealing with Monterey and Villa Grande's unsewered communities. So we have great interest in today's topic.
Wonderful. Thanks, Steve. All right. I think that's the extent of my committee member list. I know a number of you are joining from the public as well. We look forward to hearing from you later. We will have a little bit of time after the main agenda items for any clarifying questions, but we do want to save most of the discussion for what you should see as item number 6 on the agenda today. So with that, I want to go ahead and hand it over to Peristu for a review of the study, scope of work, and timeline.
Hi, next slide, please. Okay, thanks everyone for joining. Before we dive into the technical presentation, I would like to reiterate that the scope of work for this project is defined in the settlement agreement between the Russian River County Sanitation District and the North Coast Regional Water Board. First part of the scope was to see whether it's feasible and beneficial to consolidate the 4 existing wastewater districts, including Russian River County Sanitation District, Occidental County Sanitation District, Grayton Community Services District, and Forestville Water District in this region. We analyzed their sewer treatment capacities, operations, and maintenance, and then whether regionalization could improve those services. That part of the scope was complete. We identified the top 5 regionalization alternatives and presented those findings to the stakeholder committee previously. The second part of the scope looks at the potential for regionalization alternatives to provide wastewater services to unsewered communities, specifically the communities of Hacienda, Hollydale, Monterey, Villa Grande, Cap Meeker, and Garnerville. These areas currently rely on septic systems, and in today's presentation, we will look at how regionalization alternatives could serve those communities. Next, we will look at how much recycled water will be impacted by the top 5 regionalization alternatives. And finally, we will explore how regionalization can improve our resiliency to natural hazards and climate change. I also want to share a few important reminders. First, there's already a dedicated feasibility study for Monterey and Villa Grande wastewater treatment, and we will be relying on the findings from that study in this work. And second, when we talk about connections, we are specifically referring to connections to wastewater treatment plants, not to the existing collection systems in any of the districts. We also recognize that there are challenges related to funding and governance for these alternatives. And again, it's important to keep in mind that this is a high-level assessment. We are not designing or building anything at this stage. The goal is to gather information, identify potential options, and respond to the requirements in the settlement agreement. But we also consider what makes the most sense for meeting wastewater needs in West County. Next slide, please. Let's look at the overall timeline for the project. We began the process with a service area description workshop in August of last year. In October 2024, we held our first committee meeting to discuss the study's purpose, the area of focus, and to review and establish the committee charter. In February 2025, we hosted a public meeting to present and discuss potential regionalization alternatives, along with the selection criteria and scoring methodology. During that meeting, we received feedback requesting more detail on how the alternatives were ranked and selected. So in response to that feedback, we hosted another meeting in May and had a more detailed discussion about the regionalization alternatives and the selection criteria for top 5 alternatives. At the end of that presentation, committee members identified their preferred alternatives. Today, we are going to explore opportunities for unsewered communities to potentially connect to the regionalization systems. Ahead of today's meeting, we shared a summary of the discussion topics, and I hope everyone had a chance to review the material. In the fourth quarter of 2025, we will have a complete presentation for top alternatives, considering unsewered communities, recycled water option, and climate change resiliency. We will then submit the draft feasibility study to North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. In 2026, we'll focus on reviewing both the draft and final versions of the feasibility study, and we'll work with the committee to prepare the project advancement report. I also want to take a moment to highlight how important public outreach is to us. Please remember to check the webpage. We truly value hearing from the community and want to make sure people have opportunities to stay informed and share their input. Earlier this month, I had the chance to give a presentation to the Russian River Confluence Steering Committee, and just last week, Carlos Diaz, our Deputy Director of Engineering, spoke at the joint meeting of the Forestville Water District and Grayton Community Services District Boards of Directors. And we plan to continue engaging with local groups as the project moves forward. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Sam. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Perstu. Not sure that we have any other remarks. I know a few additional people have joined us. As I mentioned, we'll pause briefly after each segment of the presentation for any clarifying questions. First from any of the members of the stakeholder committee and then the general public. But most of our discussion will be saved for the end after Catherine's material. So with that, let me go ahead and hand it over to Catherine for a discussion of the refined evaluation of regionalization alternatives.
Great, thank you very much. You can go ahead and slip to the next slide. So as folks that were on the last call, maybe aware, and those that weren't, I'll just kind of give a little bit of an overview here. We had, as Perstu was saying previously, did what is called a screening level analysis of 8 different alternatives that were identified by the team as potentially viable regionalization approaches for the West County area. That screening evaluation included a high-level assessment of what the costs might be from a construction standpoint, as well as an assessment of qualitative factors that would potentially identify some alternatives as more viable or preferred than others. That screening process resulted us in narrowing it down to 5 remaining alternatives, which are shown here. So alternative 1A, which involves having two local facilities, one that is a combined facility at the Grayton Forestville site and another one at the Russian River facility where it's currently located. Alternative 1C, which would involve consolidating all wastewater treatment in the Forestville area. Alternative 2A, which involve exporting all of the wastewater out to Windsor. 2B, which is exporting everything out to Santa Rosa. And then 3B, which is a bit of a hybrid, which includes having the local facility at Grayton Forestville, but exporting the Russian River flows to Windsor. And I'll note that at the last stakeholder meeting, there was a poll provided about the alternatives in the screening and what this group thought would be the preferred alternatives. And 1A, 2A, and 3B were preliminary identified as what were preferred by the stakeholders at that time. So all within the same that made it to this short list. Next screen, please.
For that, I would just note that the poll that was conducted, it's not meant to show consensus necessarily on behalf of all of the stakeholder committee members. We're just trying to get the broad themes and trends, and that kind of leads us to the material Catherine covered in that little box on the right-hand side of the screen. Sorry.
No problem. Anytime. So the work that we've done since the last workshop really has focused around a good portion of it around better defining what the cost is for these alternatives, as well as looking at the operating costs. So that's what this table represents. It's the culmination of quite a bit of effort. So don't let this small table fool you. We went through and looked at all of the infrastructure requirements to implement the 5 alternatives. And then we took a look at what the operating cost would be. You can see some of these numbers are negative values, and that reflects that by consolidating some of these treatment facilities, consolidating staff and consolidating resources, those operating costs go down as compared to operating, say, 3 or 4 different treatment plants. So you can see some negative numbers there and some cost savings that would be realized on an operating cost perspective by regionalization. A wide range of costs here, but I think there's 2 key things to note. One is that we do not at this point have any of the unsewered communities included in these costs. These would just be costs to address the wastewater needs of the existing sewered communities. They do include providing a higher level of water quality at Forestville and Grayton to be able to meet nitrogen limits for discharge to the Russian River, which those plants currently can't meet. So that's a big portion of the capital cost under alternative 1A, for example. As well as the infrastructure. So with 2A, 2B, and 3B, a lot of those costs is the cost of conveyance out to those regionals, as well as the connection fees to cover the cost of treating the wastewater, providing the treatment facilities needed to treat the wastewater. So as we said, we don't include any of the unsewered communities at this time. And then also we're in the process now of looking at, the recycled water demands in the region and what they really are. And that work as we are identifying whether there's more cost related to recycled water conveyance. And so there could be additional costs that are associated with that aren't currently included. And those are both of those costs, both the unsewered community cost and the recycled water cost, are currently under evaluation. And that will be part of our final presentation and in the report that you guys will see. So next slide. So we had presented some qualitative criteria to this committee, and we used those to evaluate the alternatives. We also got some feedback from the group at the last stakeholder meeting regarding the relative weighting of the various criteria that we had looked at. And this table represents the outcome of that effort. So the weighting, for example, of flexibility for adding unsewered communities at 19% was kind of identified by this group as being more weighted than, say, the long-term regulatory compliance, which was at 13%. S- And that, so then we, next slide, please. We applied these weightings to the criteria as well as the cost to basically sort of lay out how these alternatives look on a scale. So in a perfect, spectrum, you would have your best options being the most highly rated from a qualitative criteria standpoint. So along the y-axis there, as well as the lowest cost along the x-axis. And so as demonstrated by the least favorable to the most favorable options line. As you can see with our analysis to this point, we've identified a line that kind of goes the opposite direction, where some of the higher cost options were actually more ranked as being favorable, and the lower cost options were less favorable due to a number of conditions. That being said, as we add in these additional costs for bringing in unsewered parcels, that will add significant costs, particularly to alternative 1A, because as you know, with that, we don't have any long conveyance pipelines that connect the two regions. So we would have to construct that if we were bringing in unsewered. So we're going to see those costs get closer together. We're also going to look at these qualitative criteria through a slightly different lens in the final selection process once we consider the unsewered, because we have we're looking at the whole alternative at that point and not just the benefits and to the specific region. So we will see this graph shift over time, and then the next time we see this, but this is where we landed at this stage. So with that, I'll pause for a minute to make sure there's any questions about this graph or what this is telling us right now.
Thanks, Catherine. So we'll pause here for any clarifying questions. Again, if you do have a question for Catherine on the material just presented, just click on the little hand raise icon. You can find that under the reactions button on your Zoom controls. And again, we're really looking for clarifying questions at this point. If you have something that goes beyond that about the actual content, or you'd like to comment on the individual alternatives, I'll take that down just in kind of a parking lot, and we'll revisit it at the end. Let me go first to Dan Fine. Dan.
Hi, thank you. So in your analysis here, you mentioned that there would be additional costs to add collection systems for the unsewered communities. Wouldn't that be a constant that would be added to any of these?
Yes, there's two components of adding the unsewered communities. One are the collection systems within the community itself, which, as you said, would be constant. But then for some of the alternatives, there would also be the need to convey that wastewater to the regional system. And so under alternative 1A, for example, we don't have any of those long conveyance pipelines in that alternative because we have two different hubs. Whereas alternative 1C, where we would be building a pipeline to regionalize to connect Russian River to Forestville, we've already got that big conveyance pipeline. So now those individual communities could just connect into that conveyance line. So that's what I was saying, like when we bring in that conveyance line, the cost of 1A is going to get closer to the other alternatives, and we'll be able to see a better true comparison of these alternatives with respect to, the driver for this study, which is not just regionalization, but also bringing in the unsewered communities and creating a true regional system.
And I'm guessing that. Oh, sorry, please.
Just to follow up here on that, on 1C, it's one facility at Forestville. There isn't a conveyance line from Russian River to Forestville, so that would have to be built.
The cost that is shown there, though, includes that conveyance line.
I see. Okay, thank you.
And I think once we go through the unsewered community slides, some of that will probably start making a little bit more sense how it all fits together. Thanks for the question, Dan. Other questions, clarifying questions about the alternatives and the cost analysis? Okay.
Okay.
Well, we'll certainly have plenty of time for discussion afterwards, but let's go ahead and keep moving to take a closer look at that unsewered community cluster evaluation.
Okay, so the second part of the work is, Sam was just saying, was starting now to look at the unserved communities. The first effort involved developing a picture of what would be the highest priority communities, with the goal here really of trying to identify, under this regional solution, what would be the, kind of areas that would provide the greatest benefit to the region from the perspective of bringing them into a centralized system. So the next slide, please. So we did that through a ranking analysis. So we developed for each parcel within the study map area, we looked at a number of opportunity factors as well as consequence factors. So we looked at, first just how close they were to an existing sanitation district boundary, where if they were inside the boundary or just adjacent to it, it would be higher score than if they were pretty far outside. We looked at proximity to major roadways so that they would be, in an area that you could easily sewer and kind of connect in. And then we also looked at parcel density, where parcel density can both be seen as an opportunity as well as a consequence. It's an opportunity because you have more parcels clustered together, a more dense area. It'd be more cost effective to sewer that than a bunch of large parcels that are largely spaced out. But it also is a consequence factor in that, more parcels clustered together that are very small also have a larger potential for impacts with respect to on-site septic systems. And so we kind of could have put that one in either category. So I just wanted to clarify that. In terms of the likelihood of failure consequence factors, we looked at the slope of the parcel. So, basically if the parcel is on a high slope area, it would not really be considered acceptable for a septic system. And so that's again, kind of either a 1 or a 4. We had the rating for septic system absorption. And, thank you for noting that. All of this information came from the analysis that the county did on the septic systems in the area. So we just basically took those criteria and then used them to apply this ranking. So we did not develop this information. We were able to derive that. So it's very helpful to have that background. So it's septic tank absorption. So that's just a criteria that's, identified as a soil based on the soil type. We had proximity to the Russian River or surface water bodies. So if it's closer to the river, greater potential for impacts with respect to pathogens in the river. So those would be a higher priority. Similarly, if they were in the floodplain, they would be considered higher priority. And then finally, any kind of proximity to water wells. Steve, I see you have a question. You're muted, though.
Hi, I'm back.
There we are.
You threw your data on the septic tank absorption and other things from county data. But
yes.
We learned out here in Monterey Villa Grande area, and I would assume is true in other unsewered communities, the county has very little data on septics themselves in terms of how many they are.
I should clarify. So the Sonoma County, they commissioned a study, a GIS study.
Oh, this is the regionalization study that you're referring to?
I don't think it's called a regionalization study. It was the community cluster study.
Okay.
That they did. And so they basically, it was a GIS based effort that, a different consulting firm did for the county that, the on-site water treatment mapping study, maybe is that what it was called. And so
the data is based on general geologic conditions, not.
Yeah, generally information, exactly. Information that was available to them. Yes, correct. Yep. Okay, so the next slide. So then, this graph just shows like the percentage of parcels that fell within the, kind of ranking of each category. And, when you do this type of risk and, ranking analysis, you really want the data to be distributed fairly well so that, you haven't like chosen criteria that skews everything to one side or the other. And so this table just demonstrates the percentage of the parcels that were evaluated and where they fell within the criteria. So the next slide. And then this graph shows the number of parcels. So the table on the left shows the percentage of parcels that fell within the low, medium, high, and high categories. And then the right shows the number of parcels that fell into those categories. And so we basically, yeah, so it's a combination of like pulling in the numbers, and then once you bring them in, mapping them out using this tool to be able to, again, distribute them ideally where you have a good distribution across the 4 categories that you're trying to achieve. And where our goal here was really to identify what are those high and medium high areas, which would be the priority for where our community clusters would fall. So the next slide. So this is the result, which is zoomed out, and we'll have some figures coming in a minute that are zoomed in. But, generally, the red parcels were, smaller parcels that were located along major roadways. There's a lot of groupings of red parcels that are close to the West County service areas. So those opportunity scores, the combination of being small and being close to the service areas, those are the low hanging fruit. Right. There's a lot of orange parcels that surround the red parcels. Of course, along the river, we've got, quite a few, particularly, along River Road there. And then one criteria that we established was, as we were setting for looking for clusters, was we needed to have at least like 50 red and orange parcels in a region to make it, kind of considered a cluster. The idea again being that, you want to have a decent sized group of homes and community there to make it worthwhile to bring a sewer to that region. Next slide. So with that, we identified 12 clusters, with the Monterey Villa Grande area being its own cluster. So they're shown here, again, Monterey Villa Grande's cluster 12, but starting with 1, 2, and 3, those are the areas south of Guerneville, north and south of the river, and the Northwood area. So kind of basically the main population centers between the Monterey Villa Grande and the existing Russian River service area. Cluster 4 is that area along Highway 116, leaving the Guerneville area. Then we've got 5, 6, and 7, which are those along River Road. We've got the Summer Home Park Road, the Hacienda Hollydale area, and then the River Road north of Forestville. There's a cluster actually within the Forestville service area that's not currently being served. That's number 8. Number 9 is that large grouping of unsewered areas around Highway 12. And then cluster 10 are just outside the Grayton area and along the alignment of the pipeline that's planned between Occidental and Grayton. And then finally, cluster 11 being the Camp Meeker area. Next slide, please. Oh, I want to say one thing about this slide. This is a very important point. What we're showing here in terms of the number of homes in the clusters, where the boundaries are, this is really for us to be able to assign a cost associated with sewering various regions. We are not trying to say that everybody within this circle would be or wouldn't be part of this project. Again, this is just for evaluation purposes because we need to have a number of parcels and a area being served in order for us to assign a cost associated with sewering, a given region. So we just want to make sure that that's clear for everyone, that if your home or your parcel is in a boundary or not in a boundary, that does not mean you are in or not in on a future project. It's just strictly for purposes of us being able to characterize the problem here and the possible solutions. So next slide, please. I wanted to say that before we get into the detail, and you could start to see the clusters here. So these are the 3 clusters that are, adjacent to the existing Russian River CSD plant. So we've got the Guerneville south of the river, Guerneville north of the river, and then the Northwood area shown here. Next slide, please. So cluster 4 is that area just outside of the Russian River along Highway 116. Some larger parcels through there, but again, a significantly dense population in some regions and definitely worth considering for sewering. Next slide. So 5 and 6 are the areas, we've got 5, which is the summer home, I'm sorry, the Hacienda Hollydale, and then the cluster 6 is the summer home. Actually, I'm realizing those are backwards on the map. Sorry, I apologize. Cluster 5 is Hacienda Hollydale, but it is marked as cluster 6 on the map. And cluster 6 is summer home, but it's marked as cluster 5 on the map. So those are backwards on the map, but correct in the text. Next slide.
There we go. I flipped it
There
for
we
you.
go. Look at that. All right. The next slide, please. So cluster 7 is the area along the river outside of the Forestville service area, but along River Road there. Then cluster 8 is the predominantly orange parcels that are along, the main within the actual existing Forestville service area, but are not currently sewered. And I would note that, Forestville staff, as part of our work with them, have indicated that there is a desire to sewer some of those homes already, and that's being considered as part of this work too. We're not double counting those. Next slide. So cluster 9 is a pretty long stretch of homes between Forestville and Grayton, but again, we're talking about connecting those 2 plants, and so there's an opportunity to build conveyance between the 2 facilities that would allow us to connect those in as well. And then cluster 10, next slide, is the area that's west of Grayton. And then again, that blue line shows the proposed alignment for the connection between Occidental and Grayton, so that community in that area would have a potential opportunity to connect into that new connection, that new pipeline. And then finally, cluster 11 is our Camp Meeker area, which is, just outside of Occidental and not currently part of the plan to sewer, but has an opportunity to connect through the Grayton system. So looking at this, we've basically are now working towards evaluating these clusters and how they would fit into the alternatives. So the next slide, please.
Catherine, sorry to pause here. I know that cluster 12 was listed as Monterio Villa Grande in your opening slide. Can you just quickly speak to that one? I know we don't have a map for it. But.
Yeah, thank you. I don't mean to gloss over it. I mean, we've sort of said this previously, but yeah, the Monterio Villa Grande is the entire area that's been studied in the previous Monterio Villa Grande study. It's the entire 780 homes that were identified and looked at there. So when we think of that area, we are looking at it as its own one cluster because the costs of sewering it have already been identified.
Thank you for that.
Yep. So there'll be a few things that we'll do. So one thing I want to be clear about is, with the Monterio Villa Grande study, there was quite a bit of effort to define what a collection system within that service area would cost. Looked at it in detail, and for this high-level feasibility study, that's not really the intent of what we can do for all 11 of these clusters. So what we're going to do is rely on the Monterio Villa Grande findings, basically identify a cost per parcel or per connection based on the costs were identified there, and then apply that to each of these clusters to identify what it might cost to build a sewer system within each of the clusters. Then we're going to also then identify what the cost is, either for new pipelines to connect these clusters to the regional projects, or to upsize the pipelines that were identified as being needed to serve the Seward communities, so that we can identify what that incremental cost would be to bring those into the system. We'll also estimate the cost for how much it would be to treat this additional flow, so what the cost of treatment. And then we'll be able to compare the alternatives again with the unsewered communities included. And as I mentioned earlier in our slide, we're also taking a deeper look at some of the recycled water needs that would occur and how those would have to be facilitated as well. So I think I can pause there for some questions.
If we could, so this is actually the point of the presentation where we wanted to just go into discussion. I see Steve's hand up, so we'll get him in first. But as we open it up for discussion, we had a couple of things that we wanted you all to keep in mind. You can certainly provide any clarifying remarks or dive into the actual content here. Specifically, we'd love to hear from you if you have any additional feedback or concerns about the top 5 alternatives based on the capital and operating cost analysis Catherine walked through. What questions you have about the identified community clusters and what's missing. And then finally, which alternatives are most supportive of connecting to unsewered communities and which might be more challenging. So I just want to put that up there in the background throughout the discussion. I'm happy to jump back to any slides for illustration as well. But let's go ahead and open it up for discussion, starting with Steve. I think you're still muted, Steve.
Yep.
There we go.
Just on the strategy to base the unit cost based on what's happening in Monterey Villa Grande, a significant percentage of the units of the parcels in Monterey Villa Grande are hillside, and you might want to do a quick map using your red, green, orange of Monterey Villa Grande, because the other communities seem to be much flatter and much closer to a major thoroughfare. So the unit cost might be artificially high in Monterey Villa Grande, considering, I don't know off the top of my head, Rich, maybe Kyla, maybe you guys, feels like about half of the parcels are in very hard to get to places.
Okay. That's a good thought. Yeah, no, I appreciate that, because it is definitely, yeah, you look at it and it comes out to a pretty high number per parcel.
Yeah, well,
So,
a lot of them are up on the side of a hill, hanging on
right.
the side of the hill, literally. So
Yeah, it might be helpful to speak with the engineers that did that. Maybe we can get a better understanding of, if we were looking just at the parcels that are more not up the hill, like what would those costs have been? Maybe
they were recommending at one point looking at a phased operation that looked at just doing that. So they might have those numbers
okay.
Easily.
Well, that's great. Yeah, well, that's very good input. Thank you.
Steve. Other questions from committee members or members of the public? Go to Rich Holmer next. Rich.
Okay, I got it unmuted.
Yep.
Hey, the third bullet, that could be a big stumbling block to getting a community collection system, is that, the Russian River plant has a history of illegal discharges and needs a considerable amount of work before connections could be made to it. So the timing of that becomes kind of critical. I mean, you could be looking at, a decade to get it up to speed. And also the whole concept on Russian River, where you basically treat the water and then discharge it into a water body through most of the year, is kind of 1970s thinking. And I think the community feels pretty strongly about having some kind of beneficial reuse of the wastewater, which would be provided by some of the more expensive alternatives. but obviously they cost a lot more, so that could be hard to do. But I just saying, the public perception and that sort of thing is going to be challenging.
Thanks for that, Rich. Good food for thought. Staff, Todd did drop a comment into the chat. You're welcome to respond either via chat or verbally. And I want to go next to Matt McDermott.
Thank you. I know West Yost had done some research about the potential for recycled water use, and I'm just curious to know if there's any data to support either item 1A or 1B in regard to recycled water use. Is it a better use for recycled water to go with 1A or 1B? Is there enough users out in the Guerneville area more so than Forestville, vice versa? Just whatever data is available.
Yeah, no, there's definitely more recycled water opportunity in the Forestville and Grayton area. You've got a lot of vineyards out there. You've got the quarries there. You're starting to get into more urbanized, so more schools, more people, parks, that kind of thing. That's actually been a struggle for, the Russian River facility is identifying, beyond the golf course and some, beyond that, they're effectively just, doing land disposal, because there's just not enough demand for recycled water. I will note though that, within the entire watershed, that, there is no discharge allowed in the summer months. Everything must be recycled. So, all of these alternatives include recycled water, use throughout the summer months. But we do have much more opportunity for, especially as flows come up, if we bring in unsewered communities. And so that's actually one of the key reasons that the option 1B, which was treating everything at Russian River, got screened out, was because of the limited options for reuse over there. That's why we said if there was going to be a regional plant, it should be where there are more demands for recycled water.
Let's go next to Chad Davison, followed by Pete Lescure. Chad.
Hi. We may have talked about this, and I know that it's my understanding that like the recycled water potential was perhaps included as, in that category of what makes, how do you define the desirable elements of the options, but and without looking at it like in a really specific cost perspective, right? And I guess my question is, with looking at bringing new recycled water users online and the cost of doing that, is that something that's going to be factored in or could be factored in, or how is that considered overall in the analysis?
Yep, we're actually looking at that now. With the options that we had, we were relying on some information that was provided to us in terms of demands of existing users. And our data and research shows that, those demands, probably the current amount being provided is closer to what the current demands are. So if we bring flows in, say, to a Forestville Grayton system, we would have to bring on quite a few number of additional users. And, we're talking in a lot of cases about vineyards, which don't have a lot of demand on a per acre basis. So yeah, that's exactly what we're doing right now. I kind of alluded to it at the beginning of the presentation. So we're really digging into that, and we're going to do our best, given some of the magnitude of what we're talking about, to assign costs to that ability to provide recycled water to, dispose of all the water. So in the next workshop and in the coming months, we're going to be providing that.
Thank you.
Coming weeks, actually, for the technical advisory committee.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Pete Lescure.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Oh,
Gotcha.
hold on. Am I muted still?
No, we can hear you.
Good. I'm getting all kind of weird signals from. So, hey, on Grayton, I got a comment and a question. When I was the district engineer at Grayton to convert it from secondary to tertiary, we put out letter to the local vineyards around there about reusing some of the water. Maybe a dozen or 2 dozen letters to the local vineyards. We got one response, and that response was, "Keep government out of my life." So whatever. So secondly, have your considerations of Grayton considered expanding the capacity of Grayton?
Yes.
Okay. Because there's some potential there for increasing about 50%.
Yep. Yeah,
All right.
we've looked at that. What we're primarily been focused around with Grayton is actually a more combined system with Forestville and trying to consolidate the resources since there's already, as you sure you know, connection between the two plants.
Yeah.
So trying to build upon that so that instead of each plant continuing to expand and do its thing, try to consolidate those
Right.
resources. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Brenda Edelman.
All right, am I unmuted?
Yep.
Okay, one of the biggest problems with the Russian River County Sanitation District has been its inability to keep a significant amount of floodwaters out of the system. And there have been, since 2014, approximately 2.5 million gallons of raw or partially treated sewage going into the river during high floods. Now, one of the things that was never resolved, although it is their permit does not allow them to do these discharges, they were illegal discharges, and the penalty for the most recent one is the funding you are using for this project came from that spill. About 50% of the parcels in the Russian River County Sanitation District are in the floodplain. And they never found a really suitable way to keep floodwaters out. And of course, it inundates the plant, things break down, and there's a spill. Has any of that been considered when you do your cost estimates as to how to address that problem, either in Russian River or any of the other systems you are considering building or adding on to?
Yeah, unfortunately, no. The work that we're doing is focused around just the treatment plants. So we are considering, you know, the need to treat all the flow that's coming into the facilities based on historical flow data. But we recognize that, you know, each of those service areas has its own collection system and collection system improvements that need to be managed and addressed. But those, if you think about that, that's common to all of the alternatives. So it's not, while it is a true cost and it is out there, it is a cost that is only for the folks that are served by those collection systems. It's not, would not be a cost that would be borne by any regional partner. And it would have to be addressed whether they were treating the wastewater at their own facility or whether they were sending the wastewater to somebody else's facility. So as a team, we decided, well, one, it was, you know, our focus was to look at regionalization. That's really what we were trying to accomplish here. And so in order to, you know, filter out some of the noise, let's say, we said, well, because those costs are common to every single alternative and they're only borne by, you know, that community itself, those should be looked at separately from this study.
Yeah, I'm not sure I follow that because have you identified the amount of surplus water that could inundate the system, various systems.
Yes, we are basing the amount of treatment required at each facility on the data that we have available to us that tells us how much water has historically come into each facility.
Okay, I'm sure down the road I'm going to have more questions about this, but I'll let you off the hook for now.
Yeah, it's definitely a complicated issue for sure. So I understand.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brenda. We'll go to Tina Lowe and then Rich Homer.
Hi, Catherine. I think I heard you say that all the alternatives retain summer recycled water use. Could you expand a bit on what that looks like in terms of treatment and conveyance infrastructure for those export alternatives?
That's a good question. That's actually part of what we're looking at right now, in this sort of more detailed dive into the recycled water. So we are looking at how, because both interestingly enough, the Santa Rosa system and the Windsor, discharge are not too far away from where we are, right? Santa Rosa has a reservoir that's pretty close to Grayton. Windsor's discharge in Mark Creek is not terribly far from Forestville. So we are looking at, let's assume what would be the cost of maybe taking that outfall in Mark West Creek, for example, and extending it over to Forestville so that you could then connect into that existing system. So in the next phase, the phase we're working on now, we will have some identified what that cost might look like. So where we are right now is we just sort of had said, we're sort of the cost we've done so far assume that the connection fee cost and what the cities and community of West County would be paying to Windsor or paying to Santa Rosa would cover whatever expansion of their system would be required. But we do want to look at, what would that expansion look like if it were to bring water back to, say, the Forestville and Grayton area, at least?
Go to Rich next.
Okay. I just wanted to build a little bit on Brenda's comment. To design the treatment plant to treat the surcharge of water that comes in during a flood event is only half of what needs to be done. Both of the studies that have been done in Monterey and Villa Grande have indicated that you have to have a sealed collection system with grinder pumps in order to have effective wastewater collection in the floodplain, especially at the depths of floodwater that are encountered along the Russian River. So even if the treatment plant was made to be able to process all the wastewater actually reached it, there are numerous sanitary sewer overflows that occur from the collection system during a flood event. And I've personally witnessed it driving down River Road during a flood one time, and seeing a manhole with the lid blown off and wastewater just boiling out. The component of upgrading the collection system needs to address the surcharging that happens during flood events. And the system really probably never should have been installed as it was. But, like I say, it was 1970s technology, and they didn't know how to deal with floods, or really maybe didn't care. I'm sure there's probably ways to, maybe have automatic valves on houses as they get flooded that would shut off the sewer connection. It's a vital part if the current RRCSD plant is going to be used. I also wanted to comment on Steve Trippy's comment, is that I think actually a lot of the communities along the river that are in the groupings that you identified are probably very similar to Monterey Villa Grande, and having a portion in the floodplain and a portion on steep hills. So you're probably not going to save a lot on costs on that.
Yeah, totally.
Anyway, thanks.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And I would just add to your comment, I mean, addressing those issues within the Russian River collection system, again, those are an issues regardless of whether the Russian River plant is used, right? That issue needs to be addressed. You're 100% right. And I think that's the kind of point we're trying to make, is that is a real cost that is part of, needs to be addressed. It's just not the purpose of this study.
All right. Let's see. I did receive a couple of comments from Kyla Brook that I want to read through, and then we'll go to Pete. Kyla just noted that we should be aware that the CAG requested hookup to one of the systems. The only item that District 5 accepted was a hookup to RRCSD. And she just mentioned she's not sure how any of that would work given the issue of costs. I don't know if that makes. And one other comment, Kyla mentioned that it'll be helpful to look at costs for multi-unit properties. The cost for more than one unit for multi-units are high, and many multi-unit owners have low-income tenants. And I think, Kyla, you've mentioned that at a couple of meetings in the past. But Catherine, again, we're not talking, the study's not necessarily looking at the cost of hooking up to individual properties, right?
No.
Okay, thank you. Pete, go ahead.
Okay. Rich's comments reminded me about the flooding and all this and that. Catherine, are your considerations of the collection systems, or are you looking at alternatives like pressure sewers versus gravity sewers, which are 70s, to use Rich's expression, 70s technology? Are you considering any pressure sewers to avoid the inflow and infiltration and all that kind of business?
Yeah, that's 100% correct. So, at least for the community clusters that are in the floodplains, that have floodplains, we are basing our cost of the collection system for the new clusters on the Monterey study. So we're assuming they're going to be these pressure systems, the same approach that was developed for Monterey. There are a couple clusters that aren't necessarily in a floodplain along the river like that. So those may be lesser costs. But we have to, think about that too. So we got a comment earlier today that made me think about that we probably can't just blanketly apply the cost for Monterey and Villa Grande to every single cluster as apples to apples, but we are definitely using that as the baseline of, like, for some of these communities, it will cost that much per home because it will have to be this type of pressure system. Exactly.
So when you're considering pressure systems, are you drawing a distinction between raw sewage versus effluent only, liquid only sewers?
No, but that's beyond, I think the way this study would shake out would be, like, we would say this cluster might cost this much to sewer, and the next phase of the work would say, okay, this seems like a really good approach. Let's get some more funding to really study this at a bigger detail. Now let's dive in and figure out what the options are for sewering this particular community. What would be the most cost-effective way to do that, and to really take that to the next level. So that's just a little beyond the scope of where we're at right now.
Got it. You're not diving that deep yet.
No, I wish. I wish we had enough money to just do it all, but
all right. Thank you.
Yep.
About the idea of diving deep when we're talking about raw sewage, but
I was thinking that, but I wasn't going to say
it. All right. We'd really love to get feedback on the identified community clusters as well, and see if there's anything that you feel is missing, as well as which alternatives are kind of most supportive of connecting those clusters. We don't have to focus on it, but I just want to throw it out there. It would be really helpful to get input on the questions that you see up here on the screen. We do still have a little less than an hour left for discussion, so I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Maybe we can share that slide that shows all the clusters in the region.
That's great, Stu. Let me go back to that real quickly.
Yeah, and if there are unsewered communities that you are aware of that you think should be included in that haven't been included thus far, that would be valuable to know.
Thanks, Ken. Linda, please.
Did you call me?
Yes, you had your hand up.
Yeah, Brenda.
Please.
Yeah, one big issue I think I can anticipate is you've identified clusters. If there is a decision to move forward with actually hooking up there will be a decision at some point if this goes forward as to which of the communities would win the grand prize. And what about the people who don't want to hook up? Is there going to be an absolute requirement that people hook up? And if so, how will it be funded if they can't afford to hook up?
I'm a technical person that, this is more of a political issue, but I think, it would be difficult to create some kind of regulation or law that would require folks to hook up. I mean, there is the TMDL out there, but I think the answer is that's all how this would be funded, how people would be connected, how the communities would come together to, create a community system are all, beyond the scope of this work, but definitely a major issue that needs to be addressed. Our goal would be for this study to identify, like, of the clusters that we've identified, which ones would kind of be the more low-hanging fruit, the lower cost, the easier to connect. There'd probably be a process of, working with those first. We'd identify a phasing plan. So some of that would be worked out over time. And then, ideally there's some, grant funding out there that could help pay for some of this costs. But I think for these projects like of this magnitude to move forward, some kind of funding like that would certainly be needed.
Thank you. Go to Todd and Rich next. And for staff, there's a couple of comments in the chat that you might want to take a look at and just provide a typed response if you're comfortable doing that, or you can just speak to them after Rich and Todd's comments. Rich.
Yeah. Just as far as mandatory connections, just a historical reference, again on our RCSD, when that system was built, not everyone was required to hook up. And many years, actually a couple decades later, the EPA came back to the county and said, "County, we gave you a grant to construct the sewer system and you didn't require everybody to hook up. The grant was because of pollution problems. Why are you still allowing those to exist?" And essentially said that if the county didn't get everybody hooked up, they would require the county to reimburse the EPA for the portion of the grant that wasn't applied to connecting people up. And so when I was working at PRMD at the time, we had to develop a program to get everybody else hooked up, which we did pretty successfully, I'll say. And then I noticed on the clusters that there's no clusters for any of the coastal communities such as Jenner and Salmon Creek, and I was just wondering the thinking on that.
Yeah, early in the project, we identified the project area. So that's the outline of the boundary that's shown on the map here. And so we, this was based on the, direction from the regional board on the requirements for this study, were this West County region. So we worked together with Sonoma Water and kind of vetted this project area map previously. So again, we just kind of, not being able to study everything, had to set a boundary for what we could look at.
Okay, makes sense.
Right. Todd, you did have a hand up at one point. I'm not sure if you still had a comment, and then we'll go to Steve. Let's see what happened to Todd. Todd, did you still have a comment or question?
Yeah. Yeah, I did actually, and somewhat related to Catherine's response. The OTS mapping study, in addition to consolidating a lot of the data that was used to develop these cluster maps, it does provide some recommendations for like wastewater management solutions, and they're not all specific to hooking up to a sanitary system. Some of them, some of the recommendations include like establishing a governance structure for community-based OTS system, for instance. And I just wanted to flag that for the project team, that sort of related to Rich's comment, and then also related to the cost of installing trunk lines for those options that may not include them already. It's possible that some of these clustered communities might be in a better position to not connect to sanitary and pursue an alternative route to more effective management of their wastewater.
Kurt, I don't know if you had any thoughts on Todd's comment. Good food for thought anyway.
Yep.
All right, we'll go next to Steve, and then I want to take a look at some of the questions in the chat.
Yeah, okay. My first comment was kind of parallel to Rich's in that the river does keep going after Monterey, and it goes on out to the ocean, and there are communities out there that need some sort of solution. But the other two comments are about one of the things that we've talked about. For instance, if Monterey Villagrán comes up with a solution, and let's say it goes to either the Russian River plant or to Windsor, it's going to go right by some of these clusters. And so the pipes going right by might be part of your considerations on these clusters, on who you pick up and who you don't.
Yep.
Because if I happen to live on Riverside Drive and you run something out to Windsor, then I might go, well, the pipe's right there. And it might decrease the overall cost per thing if you did some analysis on the pipes going by somewhere.
That's right. Yeah. That's exactly what we're doing.
Okay.
Hit the nail on the head there.
Because there's communities, there's places here that aren't in clusters where a pipe would go right by. And
right, exactly. I mean, but it kind of, it's sort of the idea of the cluster is that, even to make that infrastructure to connect into that pipe affordable, you need to have enough homes that can pay for that pump station that pumps into that pipe.
Correct.
Right. So an individual home may not be able to connect into that big transmission main, but a group of 50 homes probably could.
I don't know those things, but it wouldn't make sense to me to have a pipe running in front of my house that I wasn't connected to. I happen to.
True. It's absolutely. Absolutely.
The other is I would be careful in talking and characterizing costs as being sort of per unit, because what that means to me as a homeowner, that's everything. It's soup to nuts.
Right.
It's my connection fees. It's my grinder pump. It's the replacing of whatever I have with a new system. It's the pipe out to the pipe. And if you characterize a solution as being X amount per parcel, and that X amount of it's going to be covered with grants and costs, I still have significant costs that are going to come to me as a homeowner to connect to that system. And I would be careful about including what those costs are in your final analysis of what this is. They're going to be relatively close to each other depending on where you live. I mean, it's just important to, that's how people are going to look at this.
Mm-hmm.
What's it going to cost to me? So when you say cost per parcel. To me, that's the total soup to nuts. Oh no,
Right.
we didn't include the iPhone charger with that. That's another $20.
Yeah, we're trying to get to a total potential cost, per connection, both unsewered and sewered. That includes treatment and conveyance and everything. With the understanding that, the goal is so we can compare these alternatives against each other and say and then also look at the clusters and say, this cluster is going to be a lower cost than this one because of its proximity to, say, a transmission main, that type of thing. So the goal here is to be able to use those numbers to identify and prioritize and figure out what's going to provide the highest overall benefit to everyone. The fear is that somebody's going to see that cost and say, there's no way I can afford that for myself. And that is true. And I think that going into this, again, I've said this already on the call, but the understanding here is this kind of study and the kind of study that Monterey has done, as you guys know, in the CAG, is what you need to support getting that next level of grant funding to pay for construction and to move it forward. So that's what we're trying to get to here, is to try to find a good solution that could serve everyone the best, and then hopefully move it forward through additional funding support to get to an ultimate project.
Maybe you separate what the public infrastructure cost is versus what the per parcel cost on top of that is.
Yeah, we will have that.
Okay. Because they're meant to believe it's a public infrastructure cost to have the pipe running down the road and treated and done all that, and I pay for that with my ongoing operational costs, but you guys got to build it. And then I have to figure out how I connect to it is another question.
Right. Yeah, we will have operating costs separate from capital, but our costs will include the cost, of the homeowner, like destruction of their tank and connection to the system and all of that, which was included in the Monterey work.
Okay, thank you.
And that's a really good segue into the comment from Jim Stolman in the chat. Jim was just asking if we could summarize what was learned from the Monterey Villa Grande study regarding questions that have been raised today. And does that study suggest that combining sanitation districts would be a positive, presumably for the Monterey area?
That's a question for the CAG team to answer, I think.
Wasn't looked at.
I'm sorry, Steve?
Wasn't looked at. We looked at a collection. We're looking at it. It's not done. And what's being looked at is a collection system for Monterey Villa Grande with a connection at this point to Russian River County Sanitation, or potentially Windsor, but I think it's being looked at for a connection to Russian River County Sanitation. So they at one point were looking at other places it could go, but in terms of studying Monterey Villa Grande, it was just, where do we send it? Rich, am I right? Kyla, anybody? Yeah.
So
Don,
Steve, Rich, with regards to that study, so that's my understanding. The recommendation was to go to Russian River, the consultant's conclusion from it. But on-site waste treatment systems was also an alternative way. I don't know, given that the recommendation from the consultant was, I guess, ultimately to send it to Russian River, to answer the questions being posed, did that study suggest that combining sanitation districts would be a positive, or in this case, I guess, say, sending it elsewhere? Was it the conclusion of that study that it was better to send it to Russian River rather than to revamp or do like community cluster on-site treatment?
Yeah, the three options we looked at were, the study looked at were septic management, which for a significant number of the housing can't happen because of proximity to the river, floodplain, TMDL, et cetera, and arts policies. The community clusters that were looked at were small, 10, 15 houses, and frankly, weren't looked at very, very in depth because the places to create dispersal were not, I mean, they were like, oh, there's a lot over there, but getting to that lot, getting the permissions, et cetera. So everything that was looked at, we finally landed, at least as the advisory group, and the consultant that upgraded septics were not an option, and a septic management district was not an option. Community septic, shared septics and community septics was not an option. And the only viable option was a community-wide septic system, sewer system that would connect to an existing facility. Creating our own facility was also not an option from both a cost, management, governance, and other reasons. So what the study will show is that it's a collection system connecting to an existing plant. And that one, the one being utilized, I believe, is Russian River County Sanitation. Anybody on the CAG, did I say it wrong?
No, I just wanted to add a comment that probably the biggest obstacle to upgrades to on-site systems is the state OTS policy that was adopted a while ago, which essentially sets very strict standards for replacement systems. It treats them almost exactly the same as if they were a new house going on an undeveloped lot, and it requires soils testing, groundwater determinations, on and on. But more importantly, it sets setback criteria, which most of the small lots just plain can't meet. And there are possibilities of variances, but every time you look at that, it adds to the cost of the system. And Bralgy and Race pretty much said, upgrading OTS on site wasn't much of an option because of the difficulty in meeting the state standards.
Great, thank you. I hope that answers Jim's question as to the conclusions of that study.
You all appreciate that. Now let's go next to Brenda Edelman.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just wondering, there's been a lot of talk in the news about tariffs and also about lowering interest rates and et cetera, et cetera. And I'm just wondering how you can make calculations that are at all realistic with all this uncertainty that's going on now.
Okay, question all of us are probably trying to answer on any number of fronts, but very, very important for this specific study as well when you talk about construction costs. Catherine, I don't know if you have any thoughts there.
Yeah, and this is true for, in our industry right now, across the board, not just for this project, that, we don't really know yet the implications of tariffs for the type of infrastructure we're talking about. Particularly like the electrical, some of the equipment is subject to tariffs, and we're starting to have vendors say if these tariffs happen or if XYZ happens, this cost might be a little bit more, but there's just not enough information right now to build that into our cost estimates. I think the other thing to keep in mind is we're talking about something that's, maybe 5, 10, 15 years down the road, potentially in some cases. So it's really hard to use like what we're seeing today in this, political climate and to apply it to the future. But just to give you some perspective, I have a project right now that's, in design and moving towards construction, and we're working with a contractor to figure out costs. And even they, at this stage, knowing this thing's going to be constructed in a year and a half, 2 years from now, is struggling to define what those impacts of cost are. So at this stage, we're not considering it, but it is something that is going to affect us industry-wide and would have to be accounted for moving forward for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brenda. Kyla, please.
Yeah. First of all, Catherine, I want to thank you for all of the work that you're doing on this and how neutrally you're presenting it. It's really impressive. So thank you. I think it's great.
Thank you.
Yeah. So having been through putting in a new septic system on a property several times, I'm very aware that the assessor reserves the right to state that the property is now considered new construction, and the whole property can be reassessed to what would be current value. And that becomes a very high cost for the homeowner. And I would like to, I wonder if there's any way to petition the state on changing that regulation, as this is going to be a significant burden on the owner as well. Thank you.
That's yeah, I don't have a comment on that, but it's good food for thought for sure.
Just something to think about, because I can tell you that I have seen shocking values come up when there's a replacement or a complete redo of a system.
That's interesting. Well, I will comment, I guess I will make one comment now that I think about it. Septic to sewer is a major priority of our state water board right now. They've dedicated a lot of funding. They've created a funding program specifically for that. And they are actually targeting disadvantaged communities. So if there is a disconnect between that initiative and that policy, that is something that should be raised. It's not in my purview, but it's not uncommon to have our state have a disconnect between, one agency saying we need to do this and another policy. So
I would just like to find a way that it can be raised with a group of people who are as organized and intelligent as the members of this group are. And I really do think that it needs to be looked at before it becomes too late. Thank you.
All right. We've got
I just wanted
about,
to say, just building on Kyla, it is a real cost. And we did raise it 4 years ago with the county, and it sort of went nowhere. And then they said, well, it's not us, it's the state. But if you talk about, people with Prop 13 rates on their homes, incurring the cost of connection, the cost of a piece of the cost of construction, a new annual cost for operating, plus a significant increase in their taxes, that's unusual and unfair. And if the state wants to fix problem A, they better think of that as problem A first.
Well, for those on the CAG, and this may be helpful. I mean, I'm not sure if you've heard of the organization called CASA, which is the California Association of Sanitation Agencies, but their whole directive is to deal with legislative and regulatory issues that occur at the state level. And because this is something that affects individual homeowners, may not be on their radar, but that would be the right organization to try to connect with and see if you could get some traction, because they do have the ear of the legislature, and they're regularly lobbying and working with them.
Sounds good. Thanks for the direction.
Yep.
great. All right. Maybe I can ask a slightly more pointed version of some of these questions. Based on and I can pull the map up. Do the community clusters seem appropriate to everybody on the call? Are there any major areas that you think are missing? And
Other than the coast.
Besides the coast, yes, besides the coast, we've made a note of that. Rich, please.
Well, I'll pop my hand up again. I shouldn't do all the talking, but
yeah,
I just kind of depends on what you're calling West County,
Mm-hmm.
There's small unincorporated, unsewered communities outside of the study area. You know, I don't know if Che's still on the call, but bodega. You know,
Yeah,
Valley
bodega's a
Forge.
little bit different, I'd argue, Rich, but yeah, appreciate it.
But anyway, I mean, you know, so you could go as far as you want with this thing or just limit it to where it is. So I think for the area you've defined, you've done a great job.
Thank you for that. Very helpful. Any other thoughts? Okay. If anything else comes up as we're closing out here, please by all means do share it and feel free to share it with staff as well. Our contact information is listed up on the slide. Before I turn it over to Kent and staff for closing remarks, though, I just want to, Mark Pedroia had a chat, had a question in the chat. Staff, can you please take a look at that and to the extent you can, as I'm queuing up this next question, it'd be great to get a response. So specifically, the question is, how will you estimate the flood inundation coming in from a future Monterrey and Villa Grande collection system? In all of this, I'd hope we don't replicate the faulty system we have now in Guerneville.
Yep. So, as Steve was alluding to earlier, you know, the Monterey Villa Grande, it would be a different type of collection system. It would be a pressure system with grinder pumps at each house, and that's typically built in coastal areas and flood prone areas. Because if you imagine the system's under pressure, then you can't, you know, there's no inundation that can come into the pipes. So we have assumed for the clusters that there would be some fluctuation because, you know, nothing is 100% tight, but we're looking at and in the industry what we apply are called peaking factors, which is like the ratio of the highest flow to, say, the average flow. So for the Russian River plant, that peaking factor is above 10. It's like 10 to 12. It's a pretty high number. And what we're assuming for Monterey and Villa Grande and other communities, that would be more in, say, the 2 to 3 range. So there would be some inundation, but it would be typical of what we might see in a community that's not in a floodplain. We obviously don't have a crystal ball. We don't know exactly what that would be, but we are sort of saying it would be a reasonable, you know, sort of typical normal amount of, you know, I or inflow and infiltration for any brand new sewer community. And yes, we would not repeat the same mistakes of building a gravity system in the floodplain.
For that, Catherine.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll go ahead and close out in just a moment here. Before we do, though, I want to note that the next meeting is scheduled for November 12th, again at 4 p.m. And one of the things that we've heard from a couple of folks at the county is an interest in having an in-person meeting. A meeting would very likely be held in the Guerneville area, and we're very curious to hear from all of you if you would be interested in coming to an in-person event as opposed to a Zoom or virtual event. So it'd be great to, you know, if you would like to have an in-person event, you can just give us a little thumbs up, again, using that reactions button, or feel free to chime in verbally, but we'd love to just pick your brain a little bit on whether you'd be interested and available for an in-person event on November 12th. Thumbs up from Dan. Brenda, you had a question, or is that a thumbs up?
I would just ask, to what end?
Just one quick thing, and that is that for me personally, it depends on how bad the weather is on November 12th.
Understood. Thank you. And Steve, your question, to what end, is I think a very fair one. It's always nice to see everybody face to face, but we would really we'd kind of leave it up to the group a little bit on whether you want to head in that direction. And Ann and Andrea, I know we had talked about whether or not to move to an in-person event. I don't know if you had any other thoughts on it that you'd like to share.
This would be the one we're looking forward to possibly November 12th would be at the West County Services Center, which is the old Bank of America. And Shay could sort of attest to the great location of it. But it would be great to get in person for at least one meeting and see all the great work. So if you're up for it, we can provide details for that. It's not necessarily set up to be a hybrid, so it would definitely be sort of all in for in person if that's the direction we go. So open to your guys' feedback.
I do suggest dressing for whatever the weather is because the HVAC system in there is not strong.
Good to know. Thank you, Che.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, feel free to drop into the chat or shoot us your thoughts on attending an in-person meeting on November 12th. Going back to Peristu's opening slides, that meeting is really critical since that's sort of where we tie everything together and get your feedback on it before the report itself is drafted. So please do let us know. There is, let's see. There's another comment from Jim Stallman. What is the link to the Monterey Villa Grande study? Steve, if I understand correctly, the study's not quite finished yet and hasn't been posted publicly. Is that accurate? And you can unmute yourself.
You got me.
Okay.
The last version we saw as the CAG, correct me if I'm wrong. Che, you may have more information, but we saw was a September 30th version. And we haven't seen anything since then.
I know Steve's working on it right now.
Not me.
Yeah, other Steve. So we're trying to get that ironed out.
Okay.
And I don't know if
it's my understanding we're targeting trying to get that done by the end, having that done by the end of the year, and we're working on an amendment for the scope change with the regional board to make that happen.
Yes, sir. That sounds right, Kent.
Cool. Well, with that, Kent, I'd love to get any closing thoughts from you before we wrap up, and we might get everyone out of here a couple minutes early.
Sure. Thanks, Sam. Thanks for your facilitation on this for this meeting. And yeah, I agree. Great job, Catherine. And to the committee members, thank you for your engagement on this. You guys, it's obvious you guys have been doing this for years. You've been working with Monterey Villa Grande and looking at these unsewered communities. I was a little surprised by the comments that we focused a lot on recycled water, which is good and makes me want to look forward to the next committee meeting, because that's where we'll see more of West Yost's focus on that effort and be able to talk about that in more depth. And I guess in hindsight, I'm pleased to see then that the analysis that was done, what I'm reading from this is that the analysis that was done was for unsewered community within the sewer, the study area was seemingly viewed as fairly thorough. So that's pleasing. And again, thanks for all the comments on that. We'll look forward to that recycled water discussion at meeting number 5 on November 12th. There was one comment raised. No, there were probably a couple comments raised. I don't want to overlook it or gloss over it, about the needs of the collection systems. And Russian River was pointed out. So I want to speak to that just briefly and appreciate Catherine's response to some of those concerns and valid concerns that were raised about collection systems. I mean, one of the reasons we're doing this study, looking at regionalization, is how that may be beneficial to all these small existing systems that struggle and financially struggle to maintain their systems and keep rates as reasonable as possible. And by regionalizing, maybe that can make for a better future with more consolidated management. For Russian River, I'll say, yeah, the collection. I mean, we are looking in this study for sending waste to or from the treatment plants and not necessarily putting it into the collection system. That was mentioned already, but I don't want to overlook that things are being looked at with regards to the Russian River collection system. I mean, the 2019 floods And the settlement agreement that resulted in funding this study, some changes have already been made, revisions to the permits, the permit that we had that in part contributed to some of the collection system challenges that resulted in some of the spills. Those permit changes are now, we're benefiting from those changes, allowing us to send more water to the treatment plant. Some prior spills that have occurred from condition assessment issues. We have put ourselves in a fairly good position working with the regional board and the state for some potential funding opportunities. We have developed a design to, I believe it's 90%, Paris, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but and put ourselves in a pretty good position getting this tens of millions of dollars project. I don't know if that's how much funding will come, but it's this $45-ish million project that could really make substantial progress for us in addressing the condition of the collection system. So we got our fingers crossed for funding. We're on the intended use plan for the state, and we're hopeful that that's going to result in some substantial funding to make significant progress on improving the condition of the collection system. And we're also looking at the capacity of our treatment system. We've been evaluating unit processes in the treatment system and tentatively seeing that we have capacity, greater capacity there in the treatment. So treatments at the treatment plant. So there's still things that need to play out there, but I just want to, there is progress being made on trying to do better during these flooding circumstances, and then just general collection system issues that maybe some of these other entities are facing as well, which I expect is the case. So I don't want to I know it may have since they got glossed over because it wasn't part of the scope of this study to look at these collection systems and existing problems. But at least on behalf of Russian River, and I suspect the other entities as well, that these things are continuing to be pursued and trying to be improved upon. So hopefully, plan here, hopefully it all works together to work out for the long haul. And anyway, with that, I will again express my thanks and appreciation for all the input that our team will be distilling into the assessment moving forward. And hopefully you'll see reflected in the draft plan that is anticipated to come out in late November. So the draft study. So thank you once again, Sam. I'll turn it back over to you.
Right. Well, appreciate the closing comments. And again, thank you all for attending. Next meeting on November 12th, and we'll get you information on whether that's in person or virtual as soon as we possibly can. With that, we'll go ahead and close out, though. I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks all.